Cole, we are continuing a proud and fun tradition of celebrating the birthday of one Mr. Harold Potter with a special page-to-screen episode of the Harry Potter series. And this is the 6th year. Can you believe it's been 6
I was
years?
about to say the same exact thing. It's actually astonishing to me. Like it
It
literally, I can remember the first time we chatted about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone like it was yesterday. I remember getting the cupcakes. Like I remember it all, that whole evening, and it was delightful. But it's just absolutely crazy to me that it's been that long.
Yeah, and it flies by, just like you said. I stumbled upon that picture, I think, on Facebook or someplace. I was like, oh, that was a cool couple of years ago. No, it was 6 years ago, more than half a decade.
Yep.
And yes, and we're back talking about the Half-Blood Prince, book number 6 and movie number 6. Next year is going to be a bit interesting because it's the last book of the series, but not the last movie of the series. This was back in the craze where they had a big, usually a book related film property that they would cut the last book into 2 movies. So maybe we'll talk about at the end of this episode, like how we're going to handle that. But we're coming up with the penultimate Harry Potter story. It's a little bit bittersweet, especially because, in my estimation, the movies are getting worse and the books are getting better.
Yeah, actually, I'd say that's pretty accurate.
You are the Harry Potter aficionado of the two of us. Although, and I should, if anyone's tuning into this for the first time, first of all, you can go back and check out all of our previous episodes. Except I think maybe the first 2, because those were audio only, but those can be found on kickseat.com. But just some background. I watched all of these movies when they first came out in the theater, and after the first one, which I thought was really, really kind of cool, I didn't like them. I went back every year or however long I think they were pretty much once a year, once every couple of years, right? To see if I had, if I could catch that magic, catch that spirit, the zeitgeist of Harry Potter, because it was huge back in the day. And I never quite caught it until we started reading the books, because everyone told me, oh, you got to read the book. I'm like, I don't want to spend 30 times longer investing in something that I can't stand for 2 hours at a stretch. No thanks. But thanks to my conversations with you, I found that J.K. Rowling's novels are rich and a lot more imaginative and a lot more mature than I'd given them credit for. And the films, I just bunch of talented directors have come and gone in this series, and they fail to capture that magic. I think it's a constraint, honestly, due to runtime, because these are huge books that they try and condense into 2.5 hours, and it just doesn't work. But there's something about the Half-Blood Prince that particularly got my ire. I watched this with my wife earlier this week, and I think I annoyed the crap out of her because I was squirming. I was like literally bashing my head against the back of the pillow. I was like saying no a lot. And she was like, what is wrong with you? More than she usually does. But Cole, talk to me about your experience of the Half-Blood Prince. I assume you read the book probably half a dozen times before you saw the film.
Yep.
What was your reaction to seeing David Yates' adaptation of this particular material?
Yeah, there's a lot to say here. I too watched it with a wife, mine, not yours. And at the end, my wife turned to me and said, we first started watching it, she goes, "Oh yeah, this one's my favorite." And then at the end, she turns to me and goes, "The book's my favorite. The movie's not." And I kind of had a similar reaction because I remember Half-Blood Prince very fondly. Um, and the movie, like, there are a lot of funny moments, especially in the beginning. But this is like Order of the Phoenix. It kind of leans into the darkness of the world a little bit, and you lose like all of the charm and youthfulness of the first 2 Chris Columbus picks. And I think those really capture the wonder. And then the movies sort of abandon that and do a really bad job of saying like there's also good to be had in the world. Everybody kind of becomes a villain in a way. Like there's really not that many redeeming qualities about anybody, and makeups kind of seem a little bit fake. The one thing I do remember about seeing this movie, having read the book many times, is the burning of the burrow. Um, which I just think is an absolute filmmaking travesty, and an adaptation travesty. And they they seemingly switch. They put that into the movie and take out the scene where Harry's friends are back at the castle fighting Death Eaters with Felix Felicis, um, which is quite possibly the biggest miss ever. Because I do think that the Felix Felicis scene in Half Blood Prince the movie is quite possibly one of Daniel Radcliffe's best acting moments. I think it's positively hilarious, and I'm a huge fan of him. I like all of his other work. Miracle Workers is fantastic. I've seen him on stage; he's really good. But that scene in particular always sticks out to me. Um, so yeah, having gone back into the well for these, um, book 6, I really enjoyed. I listened to it on audio because I've read it physically so many times, and that was a joy. I truly loved listening to the book because, like, I can recite the lines from the movie to you almost verbatim. Like, you give me any line, I can almost tell you what the character's gonna say. Um, Much to my wife's chagrin as we were watching this, she found that out. And then in the book, I remember a lot of very specific things, and like, I hear one chapter, she kind of plants seeds for one thing, and then later on it comes back, and I just remembered a lot of it. And listening to it in audio is a very vibrant and new experience for me because I'm not big into audiobooks. Um, so yeah, I mean, I came out with a refreshed love for book 6, and the movie I just kind of felt meh about. And I do think there are a lot of really wonderful things about the movie, but I don't think that they add up to a cohesive whole that's easy to appreciate, like, as its own thing. Um, Slughorn's performance, for one, is among my favorite things,
Jim
um,
Broadbent, yeah, he's
that
he's
happens
great.
in the movie. And Alan Rickman, of course, is always fantastic. Um, I also like thinking back. I believe that this book slash movie had so much heavy lifting to do because you never hear the word Horcrux until book 6. So suddenly it has to explain this entire branch of magic that is crucial to the entire plot of the story. And that's a lot of burden to bear. And the book does it fairly well, in my opinion. And the movie is kind of just like, here's some plot seeds. Let's see where they grow.
Yeah. Now, I guess to set the stage, Lord Voldemort is back, but he's not actually in the book or the movie. I mean, we see like flashes of him. Characters kind of like have a vision, or he'll appear in some kind of like a dark vision. It's almost like an Easter egg to see the image of Voldemort popping up. But Harry has to deal with a new professor of potions named Slughorn, who has a memory of Tom Riddle, the young student at Hogwarts from decades before, who would become Lord Voldemort. And Dumbledore is trying to get a crucial piece of information regarding a way to stop Voldemort in the present. And that's only contained in a memory that's in Slughorn's head, but he's only got a corrupted memory. It's a fascinating idea that is kind of breezed over in the movie, and I think it's explored more finely just in the writing of the novel. But this idea that Harry and Dumbledore look into the pensieve and see Slughorn's memory from this meeting he had with a young Tom Riddle when Tom asks him about Horcruxes. And in the book, there's these kind of pop-ups where Slughorn has so thoroughly convinced himself that he did the right thing in the moment because he ended up giving a crucial piece of information to essentially the Wizarding World butcher, that Harry then has to go and find a way to get the real story, the full story out of this guy, and that turns into a whole other plot. But in the meantime, you've got the Death Eaters are out on the prowl. They're doing their thing. There are people being disappeared and maimed, and one of the big bads of the werewolf community named Fenrir Greyback is on the loose, and he's kind of almost a Voldemortish type character who is not seen a lot in the book, but they mention him and they talk about like how he's particularly cruel and he has a thing for like eating children. Wow. Um, the film feels almost like you have a favorite movie that's really long and you want to go back and watch your favorite scenes, so you fast forward on like the Blu-ray or the stream or whatever just to get to those to watch them, and then you forget about everything else. They leave out so much of the book, and I understand it's only, little over 2 hours that they have to work with, but having that extra context, I explained this to my wife. I said the first time I saw this movie, I hated it, and now that I've read the book and watched the movie again, I hate it even more, but for completely different reasons. And I understand now because I didn't have that context going into this movie. It just seems like a bunch of scenes and moments that are kind of strung together, but I don't have the deeper context for why they're important because everything goes by so quickly because there's so much stuffed into this film. But now that I know the context, I'm like, of course none of this makes sense because they're not showing the audience why it's important. I feel like this was I think we've had this conversation a bit in some of the other episodes. It's weird to me that they made these movies to appeal to Harry Potter fans. I just can't imagine as a Harry Potter fan watching this version and coming away thinking, yeah, this is a faithful adaptation, because it's literally, yeah, things from the book visualized on screen, but that's the easiest feat out of anything. It's
Right. It's
making
funny
something
you
that
say
holds
that
together.
because I remember when this came out, people praised it as being one of the more faithful adaptations. Um, I completely disagree with that now, having watched it many times and read it many times. Um, and I would argue that probably one or two is the most faithful. Maybe you could have Prisoner of Azkaban in that discussion, maybe. But otherwise, I think the liberties become bigger and bigger because the books become longer and longer. Um, and to me, I think it's that sense of inherent joy from the books is just not present in these movies, and it all feels very loomy and moody, and even the stuff that's like supposed to be fun and like, oh, they're living their lives as students, comes across as really negative. Ron has his stint with Lavender Brown and with Wan Wan, as we call him, and like it's just terrible because Hermione hates it. You have no time to be happy for Ron's success. Um, and like the only time that anything goes right for Harry in this movie is when he literally takes a potion that makes things go right for him. Um, it's all just sort of like bleh. It's like, come on, something good has to happen. And I get it, right? Like Voldemort is on the loose, but we've had plenty of books where Voldemort hasn't been physically present, namely book 3. Um, and most of book 4, obviously, until he returns. And like there's still plenty of room for little happy moments in there. And I get that the overarching arc of the story kind of necessitates this sort of like descent into this doom and gloom because Harry is all excited that he's entering this wizarding world. It's somewhere where he finally fits in, and then he realizes like he is their messiah and has to die for them. Um, and that is heavy shit, right? So like I get that if we're seeing it through the lens of Harry, it's gonna be tough. I would actually watch a sitcom set at Hogwarts with just a regular like where with Voldemort out of the picture, just normal problems in the wizarding world, and like a Boy Meets World, but Hogwarts edition. And
Chosen One meets World.
right, exactly.
Chosen One meets Wizarding World.
The Boy Who Lives meets World.
The boy who lives.
That's exactly what we need, right? And like this is a lot of revisionist history and stuff, and it's not like I watched the movie coming back with a sense of like, yeah, it wasn't as good as I remember, but like, fine. I guess I'm a little bit jaded on on adaptations nowadays. Out of Sight being the exception, because it's just so difficult. Like when you learn to appreciate like character arcs and stories that a good book can tell, it's just different in movies. And I like different is not a moral judgment either way. Like we were talking earlier, I watched The Notebook for the first time this past weekend.
For the first time?
Yeah.
Oh my God. I've only seen that movie once, and I watched it, did a little bit of a detour here. I don't know if your experience was at all like mine, but I watched it with a kind of mixed group of like, guys and girls. This is probably when it first came out on video. The guy's like, it's The Notebook, but none of us had seen it. And everyone, to a person, was a blubbering mess, like by the time the credits rolled.
Yeah, so, I was not a blubbering mess, but this something weird happened, man. Like I'm not like one of those guys that's like, oh, I'm not going to watch this, romantic movie. It just never been something that I was like, oh, I should watch this. And then Aaron was like, I really want to watch it. I think you'll like it. Let's do it. And I was like, okay. And I've been thinking about it like for days. It's really stuck with me, and I'm just like, like I said, I watched 4 movies this past weekend, and that is the one that is sticking with me because I just think the characters are so well done. They're well acted, well written, well scripted. Like it's all, and I think there are a lot of problems with the movie, but it does a really good job at what it sets out to do. And I'm just like left sort of thinking about it and just kind of reveling in like the love story that it told. And I think where a lot of people go wrong in like approaching movies is expecting them to be one thing or another, um, or wanting more from them. But I think there's a unique sort of magic, to bring it back to Harry Potter, in a movie just wanting to tell a love story and make you feel sad and happy and all the things about that particular element of life and doing it successfully, which I think The Notebook really does. Um, and okay, here's another great transition. Speaking of notebooks, we find out later in Half-Blood Prince that Voldemort's notebook was indeed a Horcrux, and Harry destroyed it. Um, and this is why I get kind of angry about the Horcrux thing, because you suddenly have this branch of magic. We get it. Like there are aspects of Voldemort's soul locked in them. And I believe the book outlines this. Maybe book 7 does. It's going to be a minor spoiler that I promise won't like do anything major for you. But like it turns out that there are only a very few substances that can destroy a Horcrux.
Yeah,
And
that's not in this one.
well, wouldn't you know, Ian? Basilisk venom is one of them. How very convenient for Harry, right? It's just like, and that's, I think it's a thing of convenience. And when you learn about this so late in the game, it feels so plot pushy that it gets kind of annoying to me. And it's like, I kind of, I think she kind of cuts herself off at the knees here, because when you don't have a capable defense against the dark arts teacher, other than the werewolf who gets fired, like students can't learn about what these things might possibly be. And it's kind of an example of like Hogwarts overcorrecting for not wanting students to learn about dark magic, to the point where like nobody even knows what a Horcrux is. And now
Right.
suddenly it appears. So I guess it does make sense from a plot perspective. Like they don't have the proper teachers to do this, and even Dumbledore is very like wishy-washy on what they are and how they work. Um, but yeah, in this book, like that's kind of my biggest gripe, is I love a lot of the characters. I think Slughorn's probably my favorite character as the defense against the dark arts. Oh, he's the potions teacher, but the rotating, revolving door of teachers.
Right.
And it's just that the plot of this book feels very necessary, and it's kind of constantly in dissonance with some of the wonder of the characters and relationships. It feels like they're battling for page time to me.
I don't. I'll disagree there. I think, and it's something that didn't that when I'm reading the book, I'd only seen the movie once, and it was more than a decade ago or whatever it was, and I'm thinking to myself, a lot of this would be very cinematic, and I started looking forward to seeing certain things in the movie, because I'm like, maybe it was in there and I just don't remember because I didn't care. But like, and not to sound crude, but there is a lot of teen love angst in this. I think more than any of the other ones. Even taking out the love potion stuff, but you've got Ron and Lavender Brown constantly making out with each other, and it's something that like carries over from chapter to chapter, and like Harry's jealousy of, was it Dean Thomas being with Ginny? He's got these feelings that he can't quite express, especially because Ron's his best friend. How's he going to feel about it? Hermione has a thing for Ron. There's all this great kind of like, to bring it back to sitcoms, tropish stuff that's handled in a very real, way. I felt almost like a teenager again reading it, because Rowling really tapped into the way to express those emotions that brings you right back to those butterflies, those initial kind of confused feelings. But the movie doesn't really do any of that. It becomes like the D or the E plot in terms of, the romance and
It's
all
very
that. It doesn't
forced
really,
in the movie.
it doesn't feel earned at all, right? But as far as the Horcrux thing, I thought it was fascinating because I had remembered Horcrux as being a thing for, in movies, 6, 7, and I guess 8, but I forgot their significance. And having it spelled out in the book, which is different than the way they lay it out in the movie, I think to the film's detriment, is the Horcrux. For those who are watching this for some reason have never seen Harry Potter, read Harry Potter, turn back now. But it's an object that has been imbued with part of a very powerful wizard's soul. So essentially, Voldemort could put part of his soul in a diary and hide that diary away, so that if anyone ever killed his physical body, he would not die, because part of his soul is, in this object still. Voldemort split his soul into 7 pieces. So 6 objects, and that was kind of a nitpick in the movie, because they're like, oh, so we got to find 6 of these things. No, you got to find 7, because as they explain in the novel, the 7th Horcrux is, or the 7th aspect of his soul is still in his body. That's what's helping him to walk around and do all these terrible things. But I thought that was really cool. I liked the sort of rule of 3 device of Harry in the book, Harry going to meet with Dumbledore for these private lessons with the Pensieve, and being taken way back into kind of wizard history to events that seem disconnected from everything that's going on now. But you're actually learning about, the courtship, or the doomed courtship between Tom Riddle's parents. A wizard. It was like a wizarding
Mhm.
mother and a Muggle father who was, came from aristocracy, and the wizard Muggle mom, or the wizard mom, was kind of, poor and downcast. All this like weird politics and love and things gone sour. And I think cutting the first 2 elements out of the movie really weakens it. Again, I understand you got a short runtime, but there was a really great lead up to that meeting memory between Riddle and
Right.
Slughorn, when you realize just what kind of a character is walking into that office. From the time before he was born, he was trouble.
Right.
Oddly enough. And
Well, and
and you
there's a
just lose
theme
so
in
much of that.
yeah, there's a theme in Harry Potter where, love and what it means to love and be loved is obviously a very, like, important theme in these books and movies. And what I really love about Voldemort's backstory, which could be a whole movie on its own, honestly, is because his mother put the Muggle dad under a love potion spell, Voldemort is essentially born without any love at all. I think that's the implication here, and that's part of the reason that he's so incapable of forming any connection with anybody, or being nice in any sort of way. Um, and I do think it's a really interesting and unique origin story. It's something where, like, I think that Rowling throws a lot of lore into Harry Potter and doesn't explain it. And we've talked about this before. That's like a fine thing to do if you're doing like a soft magic system, and you don't really want to have strict rules on how it works. But this is one area where I think it works really well. Is like, what are the implications of a love potion being used on a muggle? And how does that impact a family? And I mean, this is obviously worst case scenario, but like this kind of answers that question. And I think it's a really fascinating approach. And I completely agree with you on we're missing a lot from the movie. And I think it would take away from a lot of like casual moviegoers' love for it if we spent too much time in Voldemort's backstory. Um, to circle back on the Horcrux, I think your disagreement with me is completely fair. I would like to bookmark that, however, and come back to it after we finish book 7, because there's something else that happens in book 7 in particular that I think dilutes the Horcrux effect even further.
Mm.
Um, you may think that it elevates it, and I think that's a fair point to be made too. I personally do not like it, however, um, and I think that it muddles the story a little bit more. So that's something I just want to earmark for 2024, the grand finale. Um,
Or 2025, depending if we break it up somehow. I have no idea.
True, true. I think that would be silly, but we will discuss that at a later date.
But no, the other thing is in I think it might have been the full memory of Slughorn talking to Tom Riddle about breaking it up into 7. And essentially the only way that you can really do that, or one of the things you have to do, is to kill someone. And then Tom Riddle essentially by implication says, well, that's not really I've got that covered. I paused the movie and I asked my wife, I said, honey, who did Tom Riddle kill? And she thought about it. She's like, I have no idea. I'm like, exactly. And then I press play again, because that whole thing about how he, at a young age, he discovered his mother was dead at that point, but he discovered his father's family, and he went and he killed all of them, off screen or off page, as it were. But that was his kind of first act at getting back at the world. And it's really, it enhances what comes next as far as what he has to do, but to become this all powerful Dark Lord. But in the movie, you're just kind of like, I don't know, maybe he killed someone at some point. Who knows? Who cares? He looks cool. Yeah.
Well, right, and like that he obviously killed Lily and James, but like you don't know if he
But no,
you
this was
is
back
before,
before.
right?
Yeah, that's when he was a kid. He was
I
like
know,
a
I'm saying,
teenager.
later in life that he kills
Right.
people, but like by this point he's already thinking about it, and there's got to be Horcruxes, separately. Yeah, like Voldemort is by far like one of the least redeemable characters out there. Maybe Umbridge too. But this it's interesting because I think there's like this kind of obsession these days in storytelling with like making a villain relatable. Um, which I think is kind of silly. Like a villain can just be a villain. Like a person can just be evil for evil's sake, and that is a fine thing in a story if you're going to suspend your disbelief. Um, I don't mind when a villain is relatable. I think it can make for a dynamic story, but it's not a requirement like some people try to make it. And I think this is a really interesting example actually, because like I can't think of like one person I know who would side with Voldemort in any scenario, but getting his backstory gives you like a small sliver of sympathy for the guy, because he was just kind of fucked from the start.
Yeah.
And like I'm not, it doesn't make any of the things he does forgivable or good or anything of that, nature, but it's very much just like, damn, sucks to suck, bro. Like that's what I want to say to Voldemort. Um, and I do think that the family storylines is really interesting. And that's actually a good point that you made, because in the books, there is a lot of like positing and like considering an exploration of wizarding families, and you kind of get a sense that like it's a pretty insular community. There's not a lot of them. A lot of them are interrelated. There are only probably a few thousand in the UK, like something of that ilk. Um, and that kind of like makes it easier to understand the political divides in the wizarding world. It does not make it any easier to agree with the terrible side, but it's like, you have these two factions that staunchly feel different ways, and it's kind of like a two-party system, honestly. And it's very much like, okay, this makes sense because it's not millions and millions of wizards we're talking about. It's like a few thousand, and the two sides just massively disagree. Um, Whereas in the movies, you get hints that like Sirius is related to the Malfoys and the Lestranges and things like that. But it doesn't really like give you that sense of history. And like these moments with Voldemort, they give you a sense of why he hates Muggleborns, aka himself, and why he, is disgusted by these people. And it's unforgivable and absolutely terrible. But the history of the world makes a little bit more sense. The world building is more cohesive in the books than the movies could hope to be. And like you said earlier, it's to the movie's detriment. It loses a lot of context. and subtext. And some of this stuff doesn't need to be huge scenes in the movie. You can work these things in very, like, conversationally. You have Hermione. She's a walking encyclopedia and could look any of this shit up at any moment. And I guess she kind of does, to find out who the Half-Blood Prince is, which is another very important note. Because, like, Harry doesn't really seem invested in figuring out who it is in the movie at all. And he's not really in the book. But Hermione starts to put the pieces together in the book. And that lends more credence to who it is at the end. It makes the reveal all the more powerful, because you realize, like, she was on track. She was figuring it out. And the final moment, when this is the biggest spoiler for the entire probably Harry Potter series, when Snape kills Dumbledore, is all the more effective for having laid that groundwork.
I agree. And one of the things I loved about this is, again, having seen it but not really remembering it, and then reading the book from the opening pages. I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, especially when, not the opening pages, but when Harry and Ron have to get new potions books because they were slotted into the class at the last second. They didn't have a chance to get new textbooks. Slughorn says, "Go pull some books out of that cabinet." Ron gets pretty much a new one, and Harry gets one that's all marked up. There's all these writings in the margins, and he realizes that they're spells and tips and tricks, essentially, for potions and casting spells. And I'm thinking, okay, they're talking about Tom Riddle. Harry finds this book with all this dark magic in it. The half-blood prince is Voldemort, because, as we've discovered, he is a Muggle-born, or half Muggle, half wizard. But then I love that feeling of getting right up to that precipice. I'm like, when are they going to reveal that it's Voldemort? Knowing that it's not. I'm like, oh shit, it was Snape, and realizing how much more sense that makes.
Right.
Because
we've already sort of done the Voldemort wrote in this book type of plot.
Right. But also it goes back to, I kept imagining Snape, like, hunched over in class, like scribbling these notes as he's being, like, bullied and persecuted by, Harry Potter's, parents and their friends, during school. It's just like that ultimate, it's almost like the wizarding world of a version of a school shooter if he never acted on anything. He's writing his manifesto, essentially, in the margins of this book. But again, there are a couple of key scenes in the novel that I was really waiting to see brought to film that just weren't. And the one is, I'm going to mispronounce this because it's hard to say, Sectum Sempra.
You got it.
Okay, in the novel, Draco Malfoy is, Harry's arch nemesis, and there's a couple of key scenes with him maybe early on in the story, but for the most part, he's an enigma because he keeps sneaking off somewhere, and Harry can't figure out where he's going, even using the Marauders map and all that stuff. And at one point, Harry comes across the bathroom, essentially, and he sees Malfoy in there, like, bowing, in front of us, hunched over a sink, crying, moaning. Myrtle's in there with him, and she's alluded to having conversations with a kid who's been very upset. Turns out, I guess it's Draco. Draco is embarrassed. He turns around. They draw wands on each other. There's a big fight, and then Harry uses that spell, and it essentially, slash. It's described almost as like werewolf attack. These giant slashes across his face and chest. Snape comes in. There's blood and water everywhere because, like, pipes bursting. Other students are gathering. Snape does some magic and gets, Malfoy off to the nurse. But before he leaves, in the book, he says, "Potter, you stay here." And Harry's so freaked out by what he's done and that he's going to get in trouble. When Snape comes back, he's like, "Where did you learn that spell?" And he demands that Harry goes and gets all of his books. Harry goes, retrieves the book, or he gets the unmarked up copy from Ron, and then he goes and hides his copy of the book in the room of requirement, right?
Yep. I think they switched the covers of the books
or something like that. Yeah. Eventually Harry hides the book in the room of requirement, under a statue or something. But anyway, he goes back, and Snape, like, questions him in the bathroom and realizes that Ron has actually written his name in the book. And, it's like, oh, it's a nickname or something. But in the movie, it's just Snape, like Harry runs away and Snape goes
Yep.
to the nurse's office. There's no confrontation. There's no that kind of beautiful moment where you see Snape. It's like your first real clue that that's actually his book, because he's kind of freaked out too. He's like, no one should have. Where did this even come from?
Right.
Um,
Lots of things to consider here. Like, number one, Snape knew that this book was just like, he must have returned it as a student. So he knew that this book was in the potions room for years. And he just left it there with this spell sitting around.
the one thing I would have, not to tell J.K. Rowling how to write books, the one thing I might have mentioned is have a line in there or something like it was stolen or it was, misplaced or something, because you're right. It
Right.
doesn't make sense that this ticking time bomb of spells should just be left in a classroom for anybody to find, which would make more sense if it was written by Voldemort. So he like almost planted it like a Horcrux for someone to find and like do all
Mm-hmm.
these horrible things. But yeah, that's the one kind of hole I can really see in this story.
Yep. And then with regards to Malfoy, I don't have anything to add specifically to what you said, but the Malfoy arc is interesting to me in relation to Harry here. Because in book and movie 5, Harry goes through the entire thing with everybody hating him because they don't believe a claim that he is making. And in book 6, he has some actual decent evidence that Malfoy is a Death Eater and is going to do something very bad. And nobody believes him, not even his best friends. Yeah, I'd be pissed too, brother. Like, I would. So that's kind of annoying. But also, you made me think of a few other things that are kind of like left out of the movie. And I think these are decent cuts, but the movie would have been made better if like a deleted scene had made it back in, is nonverbal spells and apparition lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Because those are things that, like, both of which are done many times in the movie, but never explained when they learn or how to do it. Um, and then suddenly, like, book 7 will come around and like, or movie 7 will come around and people are just allowed to apparate. And and how many times have you seen somebody cast a spell in these movies without saying something? A million. Like, it happens all the time. And those are two big misses for me. And like, again, I get it. You have the runtime to consider, but like, there's so many opportunities to justify the world and make for interesting scenes, and that returns some of the wonder, because like in the book, they're all excited to learn how to apparate. They're excited to learn these techniques, and it's like one of the good things about being a wizard or witch is that you can actually do these things. Um, and that would be a really nice restorative opportunity for some of the happiness to come back. Uh, but instead, they're just like, "Nah, we don't need it."
Right. I mean, during one of the apparitions exercises, they have to. Apparition basically is, kind of like teleporting from one place to another. They have to get into a hoop, like a hula hoop on the floor. If they can do that, then they get, they get to graduate into, using that spell. At one point, I think it was Ron, maybe he did it, except he left like half an eyebrow, or he left an eyebrow outside the hoop. So it's just like there's really weird things that you can kind of imagine, but you wouldn't want to see in real life, because like that's strange. The another like omission, and this goes back to Felix Felicis, which is a luck spell, a luck potion. And Harry is able to win this by using the potions, the shortcuts in Snape's potion book, to basically become the star of the class, until it doesn't really work anymore, and he has to rely on his own, smarts, but it doesn't quite work out. But the bit where he takes the potion, because he's got to get this information from Slughorn, in the book, there's this whole subplot about how the kids are taking potions, but they're not taking care of magical creatures. And um, oh my gosh, I've totally blanked on his name.
Hagrid.
Hagrid, thank you. There you go. Hagrid's got hurt feelings about this. And he's further hurt because Aragog, the is that the name? Yeah, Aragog the giant spider, who was like his best friend who lived in the forest, dies, and they're gonna hold a funeral for him. And Harry and Hermione and Ron are debating, like, should we even go? Yeah, it'd mean a lot to Hagrid. Yeah, but that spider tried to kill us. But what about Hagrid? He'll get over it. And they decide not to go. Harry ends up attending that memorial with Slughorn and making a plan, sort of, I think if I have this right, in exchange for the memory or information, he's going to help Slughorn get some vials of this dead spider's venom, which is very, valuable on the black market. It's still this kind of a covert thing where they go to the ceremony, and then Slughorn kind of like pockets, he goes up and kind of touches or squeezes the venom out of the thing without anybody noticing. In the movie, it's just like, hey, Slughorn, let's go visit Hagrid. Oh, look, he's just standing out in a field in front of the dead spider and no one else is around. And then Slughorn's like, hey, Hagrid, would you mind if I just took some venom off of your spider? I can get a lot of this on the black market. I'm like, what are you even doing here? There's no danger. There's no empathy, consideration for what the scene calls for. It feels cheap because there are other people at that gathering. It's just, I don't know.
I actually, this is my turn to disagree. I kind of like that from Slughorn because throughout the movie, especially with the actor, I think the book does this pretty well too. Um, you get this image of him as this sort of like egocentric guy who like just wants to surround himself with power to make himself look better.
Yeah.
And it really follows that he would be so inconsiderate as to say, like, I know this was your friend, but can I have the venom because it's important to me? Um, it's kind of a selfish thing, and everything that Slughorn does is to protect himself. He hides in muggles' houses. He wants his old job back, but it has to be potions, not defense against the dark arts. He'll take the venom. He's always out for himself. And what's really interesting is he's a super dynamic character because you know that there's good in his heart. Like, you know that there's something in there that is making him like good and decent. But everything we see, he's kind of like if Gilderoy Lockhart was a little more competent,
Mm.
um, and a little more content to let the power surround him rather than take it for himself. Um,
And he's basically a fame whore, and he likes being able to tell stories about his famous friends and be able to get in anywhere he wants,
yep.
and so it's fueled from a deep insecurity and they need to be liked. But my pushback on your pushback is
Oh, I
from a
feel so
story.
pushed back.
You're literally up against a wall. No, my disagreement there is that just from a storytelling perspective, the whole idea of and it kind of works because the luck potion is supposed to grant you luck in impossible situations. Everything is just going to go your way. I think that what I liked in the novel is that Slughorn was still being, I mean, he didn't take the potion, but it was with Harry who was trying to get something done, and so the situation is going to work out. But it was still kind of discreet. Like if he hadn't had
Right.
that potion, him sneaking that venom off the fang would have been a 50-50 proposition. It might not have worked. And I like that they kind of preserve that element. Like this is what the potion is helping them to get away with, because if they, in the absence of it, they would have been really in trouble. There's also the matter of propriety, because I don't care. It's kind of like going to a funeral and with an open casket and saying, I know that's your dead husband's antique watch that's passed down through generations, but I could get like $5,000 for that at the pawn shop. Would you mind? He's
Yep.
not using it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it does give off that energy, and I appreciate where you're coming from a storytelling perspective. Though I do think it still aligns with his character, which is
It does.
kind of what's interesting about the moment, and it's something I never realized about Slughorn. And I think he operates in such a unique space. Like every other teacher that we've had has been either bad or good, with like a very specific reason for it. Um, and I think Slughorn means well, but he is so driven by this sort of hubris that he can't really stop himself. And I think that plays really well into the theme of the memory that he won't give. He's so concerned with his image that he won't tell the truth about something that could possibly save the world. And I
Even to
think
himself. Yeah.
exactly, and I think that's a really interesting character motivation when you can craft somebody who's that interested in self-preservation, that they may let the entire world die for it.
Well, because if they're found out, then people will not like him, that's what drives him is he wants to be liked. Which is yeah, that's crazy. But one of the other things I want to talk about is one of the most chilling things I've read in a long time is that scene at the end of chapter 7 where they're on the Hogwarts Express. And you talk about the balance of light and dark in this book. The Hogwarts Express train ride is always kind of an uplifting passage in any of these books because Harry's getting away from his, abusive, neglectful, family back in the regular world. He's off to this magical, adventurous place. There's always the cart with all the candies and stuff. He's meeting up with his old friends. In this instance, he's deliberately going to spy on Draco Malfoy, who in the novel is kind of holding court in this back cart. Harry slips on the invisibility cloak, gets in, and overhears Malfoy talking about like, well, none of this is going to matter next year because I've got big things coming my way, and yada yada yada. And that's what starts Harry's suspicion that he might be a Death Eater, or at least a Death Eater in training. There's a bit of that in the movie, but they do that whole thing with like the blackout potion, and that's how Harry sneaks into the car. And when Malfoy kind of does the spell to get Harry paralyzed and on the ground, he lifts off the cloak, the invisibility cloak, and Daniel Radcliffe's just kind of like, in the book, it's so much more terrifying and intense. And I think Malfoy actually stomps on him
He breaks
and
his
leaves him like
nose.
he breaks his. That's right, and that's in the film too. But there's more. It's like the really taking of the darker tone, the darker path early on in the book that really sets the stage for like Harry and even his friends are much more caustic to each other. They're less precautious of authority. They're talking back directly to people. Even Dumbledore has to correct him when Harry's like, yeah, we got to go get Snape. And then Dumbledore's like, that's Professor Snape.
Yep.
But there's these moments that, come across in the film. And I think that train scene is even later in the movie, if I recall correctly. They just don't work because they don't have that same, I guess, attention to detail in terms of what this is saying about the characters, what the characters are actually doing to each other. They're just like, okay, we got this scene, we got to get it in and out in a minute and go.
Yep. There's a lot of connective tissue in the book, which is, the nature of novel storytelling is you have a lot of space to do that. You have as much space as you can write. And in the movie, like you can tell that all the people making it like know which scenes are important, but that like they don't quite know why. And the scenes that are supposed to have implications later down the road don't have those. And that's why I really liked when you said you asked Dar if she knows who Voldemort killed, because that's like a really important connective tissue that's just completely absent. And that's kind of what you get if you're making movies for the fans of the books. And I think that on a meta level, Harry Potter is unique in that way. You could maybe have other examples like Lord of the Rings or even Twilight, maybe. In that, like, Harry Potter was so immensely popular that, like, it is financially viable to make a movie for just the people who read the books, if that's what you really want to do. Like, you will actually make money doing that. And that's not true of most adaptations, right? The purpose of most adaptations is to get people into a fandom because that's where you'll make the money. But Harry Potter is unique in that, like, it is so wildly popular that this will make you tons of galleons.
Yeah. And I can say as a fan of the Harry Potter books that I am not satisfied with this. I'm waiting for, 10, 20 years from now. I know there's talk of like a new Harry Potter series or something.
A
I
Max
don't.
series, I think, yeah.
Okay, maybe I don't know if is it a sequel, is it a read adaptation? What have you heard?
I am not actually sure. I remember reading about it and thinking like we don't need this, and then moving on.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is I feel like we kind of if they're readapting the source material, I'm kind of there for it because I could see each one of these books being, a 5, 6 part series to really explore these ideas and all that. I don't think it would feel like a retread necessarily. Plus, it's been 20 years plus since the first
Right.
Harry Potter, right? I mean, I heard a remake of a song the other day from a song that is less than 10 years old. I'm like, we're really here now, aren't we? Culture is
Yep.
just eating itself at a faster pace. But
Yeah.
we alluded to this earlier, and I want to end with this. Dumbledore and Harry go after a Horcrux. in this dark cave with this giant black lake, and there are, reanimated corpses in there, and Dumbledore has to drink this potion in order for Harry to be able to reach into this basin and get a locket, which is the Horcrux, and they barely make it out, and they get back to Hogwarts, or the hills surrounding Hogwarts, and they notice the dark mark hanging over Hogwarts, and they're like, that means someone's been killed, and or the Death Eaters are in Hogwarts. Holy shit. And it's a race against time. They get there to discover that a gang of Death Eaters is in the school fighting wizard students, and the kids are having their asses handed to them. And that's when Malfoy confronts Dumbledore in that bell tower or whatever, that spire. Harry's kind of off to the side,
and he disarms Dumbledore, which is important.
Yes, but then Snape comes
in.
Well, and don't tell me, because I forgot. I've forgotten a lot of what.
I'm just telling you to remember that point. That's another bookmark for you.
All right. But Malfoy can't quite do it. He's been sent by Voldemort specifically to be the super secret assassin to take out Dumbledore. And the whole reveal of like the cabinet, and he was using that as a place like from the shop in Diagon Alley to get into Hogwarts, and there was essentially the underground tunnel through magic to get the Death Eaters in there. I feel like that was introduced very late in the book, but they keep alluding to it throughout the movie, and I'm like, no, I don't want to see this. I want it to be a surprise. But that whole thing where we get imagery from the end of the book in the movie, but it's completely unearned, when Dumbledore falls to his death, and then there's like all these thousands of students or hundreds or whatever gathered around his body. Like in the book, it makes sense because all the students have been alerted. Everyone's like scrambling. Yep. There are wizards like dying and getting injured. Well, not dying, but I think most of them are horribly injured. In the film, it's just like, yeah, I guess people are just hanging out. They're supposed to be in their dorms. Like, how do they know any of this is going on? And then Malfoy and Snape they just kind of run out of the school. There's no fighting. There's no real conflict. And it was so lame that I couldn't even believe it.
Or in the movie, it's like, why were they even there? What, like, if Malfoy was supposed to do this, they're literally just there to watch him do it. Are you kidding me? Like, what is the point? He went through all this work to let them in. They killed one person when they had access to the entire school. They didn't take anything. They didn't do anything. Literally, this was it. And it's just stupid. It's just fucking stupid.
It is. I mean, that's a great way to put it. I mean, I was like, from the point where Dumbledore falls to his death to the riveting chase with Harry Potter pursuing like the Death Eaters out of the castle or to the school, and there's other wizards like fighting, and Harry's like, I'm tripping over bodies and like slipping in pools of blood. Down to the countryside and all of that stuff, and the big reveal of Snape as the Half-Blood Prince. My blood was pumping. I was misty-eyed because Dumbledore had just died. All these emotions I didn't feel 10 years ago watching the movie because I didn't understand any of it. And then watching the movie again, I'm expecting like, oh, here's where it gets really... What the fuck?
Yep. Yeah, and I think they give a lot of screen time, obviously, to the whole Horcrux hunt, which I do think is very cool. There's a lot of cool effects in there. And it's fun to watch. And that is a very tense scene in the movie. So I got to give them credit for that. But my question to you, which comes from a conversation I had a long time ago with a friend of ours named Travis. The question is Dumbledore a villain? Because there's some weird shit that goes on, and this is another bookmark for next year. But it's an interesting question when you learn the full context of everything that has happened. And Dumbledore is cast in a very different light when you start to think of it that way.
I kind of had this conversation with my wife after the movie was over, because she posited a theory that, because I don't remember if she's seen the last two movies or not. We might have seen them together, but we don't remember them. But she has a theory about Snape's involvement in Dumbledore's death, and I think I might know where you're going. We'll talk about it next time. I don't want to get... I want to go down that rabbit hole, especially because it'll be embarrassing if I'm completely off base, but I don't think I am. One thing I missed really in this movie was Richard Harris as Dumbledore. I like Michael Gambon, but the way that Dumbledore is described in the books, he's much more Richard Harris, where he's like I could see that guy on a wizarding bubblegum card with a giant like
Yep.
bubble. Like I don't see that with Michael Gambon. He's got too much gravitas, too much seriousness. He doesn't have that twinkle in his eye that the first actor who played Dumbledore did.
Yeah, so I'm actually team Michael Gambon on this. I really enjoyed Richard Harris, and I think that he was a better fit for those first two movies. Um, but understanding Dumbledore's full arc, we actually get a little bit of Dumbledore's past, like we do Voldemort's in the next book. Um, Understanding his past and understanding a little bit more about him, I think, lends more credence to Michael Gambon's series-long performance
Hmm.
of the character. Um, I truly believe that there are huge pros to both of them and that they're both fantastic. Um, and it's obviously tragic that Richard Harris died. But Michael Gambon, I think, was an exquisite replacement for that reason. And there are many aspects of Dumbledore that the books will give us and the movies do not, um, that I think play a really important role in that context. And that brings up an interesting point with Harry Potter is like because it was made for the fans of the books, like so much of the movie context makes sense if you've read them, and if you don't, you're just kind of left to flounder.
And that was my experience for all 8 movies.
Yep, I get it now.
Aside from the first one, because I think that was a great gateway and it showed the promise of what these are. I'm like,
Yep.
oh, okay, so there's gonna be like 7 or 8 more of these movies or whatever. I'm in. But then
Yeah.
as it goes on, it gets more faithful to the books, but chopping out this important context. I'm like, these are just things strung together, and I don't understand what's going on.
Um, and also the directors really seem to stop caring about the House Cup.
Or the Sorting Hat, like the Sorting Hat even gets referenced as being in Dumbledore's office in the book, and it's not even like, yeah, that's it. That is something that is kind of lost in the film. And again, I understand, as we've said this whole hour, it's runtime, runtime, runtime. But even in the novel, you get the sense that they're sixth years now. You know, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and there's like little kid wizards who all look. I think there's a line that said they all look like they're 5 or something like that. They just look
Yep.
impossibly young. But even with all the dark stuff going on in the world, there's still young kids experiencing all this for the first time. We get little bits of that. I think aren't Crabbe and Goyle disguised as one of the like the first years or something, or because it's part of the ruse with the room of requirement.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they
Yeah.
either take polyjuice or like do some random shit. I don't know. And that's another problem with the um just the whole world as a whole. Potions are just like not well explained at all. Like Polyjuice potion is really hard to make, but then everybody's using it suddenly, and then Felix Felicis is like a thing that could make everything go right for you, but nobody really tries to make it ever. Um, and they say it can go disastrously wrong if you don't get it right, but like Slughorns seem to do just fine. Yeah, there's just a lot of weird stuff with potions, but that's a conversation for another day.
Well, you got me thinking about something because yeah, that idea the luck potion could go horribly wrong. I wonder, maybe this is in book 7, so you can tell me if it is. But has anyone ever tried to deliberately make a bad luck potion, because that could be an incredible weapon?
I mean,
Because
that
I'm
would be hilarious, and I won't spoil whether it happens for you.
ooh, okay. We got like 4 or 5 bookmarks now. Um, but yeah, Cole, I think I'm just gonna bite the bullet next year because I don't want to drag. I love these conversations, but I feel like next year we will read the book 7 and we will discuss movies 7 and 8
I
with book
think that's the
7.
correct plan. It would be really silly just because the movies are better viewed as a unit. Um, and in my opinion, movie 7 slash Deathly Hallows Part 1 is the most boring of the entire series.
Okay. Plus, other obvious question: is there a defining, like, is in the book, is there a good halfway point? Like, is it an even divide between like, here's where the book is about halfway, so it makes sense to cut the first movie off and we're gonna lead in, or is it more muddy? Is it muddier than that?
I will give them credit. I think they ended the Part 1 movie at a very interesting and suspenseful point that gives it a sort of clean feel.
Hmm. Okay. Well, we'll talk about all of that next year on Harry Potter's birthday. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've really enjoyed these conversations because these books, as I mentioned at the top, are a lot richer and more involved and worthy of discussion, I think, than I certainly gave them credit for. So Cole, before we go, where can people find you and what are you up to?
ColeRush.com. I'm writing anywhere and everywhere that will pay me money to do so.
All right. Well, yeah, folks, definitely check his stuff out. Information will be down below. Definitely, if you like this show, please like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications and all that good business. Check out, I don't even know if we have a Page2Screen playlist, but I haven't broken out the Harry Potter stuff. Maybe I'll do that someday. Probably not. But yeah, until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much. Take care. And Cole, we'll be back next month talking about something.
Catch you in, next month. And then next year I'll catch you for year 7.
Oh my God, lucky 7. All right. And take
Fairly
care, man.
well.